Thanks, Sherry. Well, we enjoyed the presentation the city put together on July 20th. And one of the things that was really encouraging, I thought, in it was how doable it sounded when Tanya started talking about it. And she made it sound fairly, practical and something where we didn't have to take a university course in order to run a live event. And that's always a good thing. We thought we'd bring her back for Act 2 and ask her to do a deeper dive, look into how best to do it, experiences she's seeing. And she's in a unique position as the manager of all events in Celebration Square. She's in position to see all kinds of approaches to this and has had to become a master of COVID practices herself. And so you don't have to read everything. You have to read selectively and use selectively. And that's what we've asked Tanya to share with us, is how best to do it and what kind of practical steps there might be and what to look out for and how to use volunteers and board members and make this something that actually maybe enriches the quality of your organization by virtue of who participates and how they're able to help the organization they're a part of and a volunteer in support of. So Tanya is also a professor on really event production. I hope I've got that right, Tanya. At I think it's golly, I should know this, isn't it?
Centennial.
Centennial. I was going to say Humber, my mistake. Centennial College, and has been with the city for what, 2 years now?
This will be my 3rd year actually with the city now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Tanya, we were really engaged by your presentation, and hopefully you don't mind the odd interruption from Sherry with a question from the chat room. And we've got some festival people here and some big band ensembles and all sorts, a good range of active participants in the arts and culture scene in Mississauga. So have fun, and we're looking forward to your presentation. So over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. There are definitely some familiar faces I see here. Ron, how are you? So nice to see you. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tanya Smither. I am the Supervisor Event Services for Celebration Square. I also dabble, part-time professor at Centennial College in the Special Event Planning program. I teach some courses, sponsorship development, event selling and sponsorship, and volunteer and team building. So my career has been events from the get-go. I started while I was a part-time in school, actually at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, handling all their events. Luckily, they liked me enough to hire me full-time. So started there, I was there for 8 years. And then I took a really big risk and went over to the Toronto 2015 Pan Am Games to sit on the organizing committee. Did that for 2 years until my contract was finished after the games. Then I moved over to City of Toronto special events and decided after 10 years I was done commuting downtown Toronto, living in Brampton. So I saw an opportunity with the City of Mississauga at Celebration Square, and I applied, and luckily they liked me enough to hire me. So that brings me up to date with where I'm at now.
Tanya, you don't look much older than 22. How did you do it?
Stay out of the sun as a fair-skinned individual, and play sports. So,
good recommendation for anybody.
What's that, Mike?
I'm just saying it sounds like a pretty good recommendation for anybody, and you make producing events look, like a healthy thing to do.
I mean, as long as you've got that work-life balance, that's all that matters, right? I think everybody here knows exactly what that's like. So amazing. So I'm going to actually go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Just give me 1 second to get set up here. Can you guys all see that okay? Yeah, perfect. Amazing. So as Mike and Sherry mentioned, as we go through, I'm going to be, speaking to some documents and events, and then Sherry, I've got you on my screen too. So as questions come up, feel free to just interrupt me, and we'll go from there. So, oh my gosh, what a challenging 18 months has it been? Is that the right amount? I've lost track now, I'm sure, as we all have. So to give you all some background on how this document came to be, after, like I mentioned, a very difficult and challenging year, a group of us from within the city, from many different lines of business and departments, got together to begin the conversation with a very optimistic and hopeful lens around the return of outdoor events and what that could look like at the City of Mississauga for this summer, as well as hopefully future summers and years as large events return back to normal. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work with some amazing group of my colleagues and event professionals from areas like the Living Arts Center, Small Arms Inspection Building, and the Community Development team to help develop the document that I'm going to go through today, which, as you see here on my screen, is our 2021 City of Mississauga Outdoor Events Planning Guide. Just revised actually for that July 20th presentation that we did. So this document here does currently represent the roadmap to reopen, where we're at in step 3. Now, I know there are a lot of talks about a potential step 4 or something they're calling like an exit stage within the province, but this covers where we are now and the guidelines. Chances are, if we end up getting to that step 4, or whatever they're going to call it, as we all know those titles change, things like capacities may change. But I really see some of the things that are, pretty standard now, like face masks and social distancing, kind of remaining. But I mean, what do I know? The province might change at any point. So just keep that in mind as we do go through this information. It is relevant to where we currently are in step 3. So that being said, we all know, I mean, you guys are all amazing event professionals and have such incredible experience. And we all know how important events are to a part of the community and creates that level of community building. And that's what this document hopefully is going to help go through, is it really aims to support people like you, event organizers of all types, whether small events, large events, concerts, trade shows, food truck rallies, doesn't matter. It helps in the planning efforts and provides guidance on operating safely and reducing the risks associated with the transmission of COVID-19. So while the return of events is incredibly important, as we all know, it is equally important to ensure everyone is taking the appropriate measures to protect people that you work with, as well as attendees at the events. Event organizers, like all of you, are responsible for implementing measures to reduce the risk of infection among all those who participate in their activities or events. And the same goes for the venue as well. We are equally as responsible. And so it really is a joint effort between whichever venue that you're using, as well as the event organizer. It's really important to note that this document doesn't necessarily replace any of the typical planning procedures for events at the City of Mississauga, but it does act as additional measures very specific to COVID-19 regulations that have already been outlined by the Ontario government, Region of Peel, and the City of Mississauga policies and bylaws. So this is really just taking all that information that already exists, that's already been created, approved through all those different channels, and kind of bringing it together to help consolidate it and make it a little bit more clear and easy to understand. Most importantly, one of the very beginning steps to start anything is, how do you host an outdoor event? What are the steps that you as an event organizer needs to take in order to host an outdoor event within the City of Mississauga? So that's where we start. So it starts off by going through the simple 5 steps, or what I like to think are simple, hopefully. So step number 1, review what type of activities and capacities are permitted under Ontario's COVID-19 public health measures. So we all know different types of activities and different venues have different allowances, capacities, and etc. So think about, what type of event are you hosting? Is it a concert? Is it a trade show, like I mentioned, it could be, depending on what it is, there are specific regulations that the province has put out that dictates what can happen within what type of an event. And it's all on the Ontario website. All those links are within here as well. So everything that you need is really in this document, including an abundance amount of resources. So step number one, what type of event are you having and what are your capacity limits? As well as what venues are you looking at and what are their capacity limits? So that's step one. Step number two, contact us. So contact the City of Mississauga. The best way to go about it is to contact our customer service center. That way you can inquire about available event spaces. So let's say you're doing your planning and you know what type of event you want, but you're not overly familiar with maybe what type of venue would suit your needs. Call our customer service center and say, listen, I'm looking at hosting an event. Here's, our plans. And their job is they'll recommend you or point you in the right direction of that appropriate venue that would be great for whatever it is you're looking to host. We also have many different resources through our culture websites and community development that talks about all available parks, spaces, events. I'm biased because I've got Celebration Square, so I can tell you about that until I'm blue in the face, but there are so many options within the City of Mississauga. So like I mentioned, they'll help point you in the right direction of a facility that will be best suited for your needs. So once that has happened, step three, you submit a rental request for your specific event space with that guidance from our customer service center. A key component here is you have to give yourself that level of planning time. 9 times out of 10, we all know that in order for an event to be successful, you can't just turn around something on the fly, depending on what it is you're looking to do. You need time to promote, you need time to plan, you need time to organize, especially with the added level of COVID-19 complexities. So remember that as an event organizer, you should give yourselves a minimum now of 6 weeks prior to the event date. We all know that planning, that 6 weeks is going to go like that, right? So keep that in mind as you're planning your event. What is your lead time, right? So step number 4, work with the city staff at a specific venue. So you've submitted your rental request. Hopefully you were successful. And now you'll be put in touch with a person from that venue. So I can speak to that from a Celebration Square perspective. So you've submitted your event application and now you've been handed over to me. So myself as the venue representative will work with you on all the additional event details that you might need to confirm your event, location, capacities, all the fun things. And we'll also help you obtain any additional permits that may be required. So mobile licensing, AGCO, things like that. It will really help guide you through that process. And you can say to us, okay, Tanya, well, we want to have, 6 food vendors. I'm going to say, okay, perfect. You need mobile licensing, you need Peel Public Health, things like that, right? And then step number 5 is consider and plan for measures and controls that your event will take to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And you have to develop a written Ontario COVID-19 safety plan. Now, when I say that, a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean? What is the safety plan that you talk about? Well, we're going to go through that. Got 2 things that I'm scrolling through here. So the government of Ontario has provided so many different resources to help event organizers plan for reducing the risk of COVID-19. That key resource being this COVID-19 safety plan. Now, it is technically called COVID-19 Workplace Safety Plan. And that's fine. That's the umbrella they're taking. But even though it says workplace, anytime you see that workplace, change that word with event or venue, if you will, for your own purposes of planning. The safety plan requires you as the event organizer to fill out what your plan is when it comes to COVID-19 at your event. It also provides amazing guidance and recommendations as well. So we're all not, professionals when it comes to COVID-19. Like, people at Region of Peel or, that have that specific training. But I'm going to show you this document as well in a second. It tells you step by step really what to do. It is extremely helpful. Throughout the Return to Outdoor Events planning guide that you see here, there's so many different links to resources, including the safety plan template. So I think I shared this. I want to see if I click over to the other tab if it changes. Sherry, do you see this?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, perfect. So when you click on the safety plan, it brings you guys to this website here. There's a lot of information here, so please don't let it intimidate you, okay? There's a lot, but it just really requires some additional reading, as we all love to do. So it really explains an overview. It talks a lot about the Occupational Health and Safety Act and what you need to do as an event organizer to ensure the safety of your event attendees, as well as your colleagues and volunteers and things like that. So how do you start to develop your COVID-19 safety plan? It's a pretty important question. There's so many resources here. I'm not going to go through it line by line because you guys will probably be bored stiff, and I understand that, so that's fine. So it talks about a few different things. So understanding the risks. So what are the risks? It gives you guys some examples about how the transmission happens, how it's spread, things like that, which we all probably know of by now because we've heard it 100 times. Talks about different levels of controls and the hierarchy of controls and how it works. So the levels of hierarchy of controls are things like elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. As you can see here, what is most effective versus what is least effective. But again, so it gives you all these examples of what each control means. So elimination is exactly what it sounds like. How are you removing the risk of exposure entirely from the workplace? For example, having everyone work from home all the time would eliminate that risk. Now, in the line of events, we all know that that might not be possible because the whole point of events is to have people gather and be together. So we know that elimination is not necessarily the best control measure for events. So what's next? Substitution, and so on and so forth. And if you can't do any of these things because that is the nature of our business, then, maybe it's about administrative controls and personal protective equipment. So here is the very key portion of this. So the workplace or event safety plan, however we want to call it, focuses on 6 key questions. Now, within these questions, it actually tells you how to handle each one of these questions, which is incredible. So as the event organizer, you're filling out this document, and there is at the top of the very page here, I'll show you. If you hit the download button here, it downloads a Word format, and you just have to type it out within that and then save it to your computer. It's very, very simple. Sorry for all the scrolling. It's a lot of info. So let's look at the safety plan questions together and the recommendations that it goes through. So like I mentioned, you as the event organizer should be reading these, and you should be answering these questions when it comes to your event. So question number 1, how will you ensure all workers or event attendees, whomever, know how to keep themselves safe from exposure to COVID-19? It really provides very clear instructions and recommendations on what you need to do in order to be successful. So it's kind of giving you the answers for yourself to build out your safety plan. So you should consider, what guidance will you need to provide? How will you share information? Do you need more frequent types of communication? Where will you update yourself on new COVID-19 guidelines, right? Gives you everything that you could possibly need here to be successful. A really great example for this section is ensure your procedures are up to date by a daily review of the Ministry of Health guidelines. So that's question number one. Question number two, how will you screen for COVID-19? So as we all know, and I feel like screening is now a part of our daily lives, we have those questions that we all answer and things like that. So as we know, screening helps infected workers or patrons and others from entering the workplace or the event. This can reduce transmission at your event quite significantly. So it talks about different ways to screen, what is more successful or what is easier, and it talks about so many different levels. It also talks a lot about self-monitoring and the screening of non-workers. So this is the customer patron level as well. So consider how you'll be screening clients, customers, and patrons. Where possible, actively screen using the screening tool. So they even provide you a link to a tool that you can actually use, which is incredible. So again, it talks about that. Talks about what to do when you receive those screening results. So I can tell you too, from a City of Mississauga side, they built in a screening tool for all employees that you have to submit prior to entering the workplace. So you have to fill it out. I think, it's really, really strong. So if you, depending on if you answer yes or no to these questions, it'll tell you, yes, you are safe to enter the workplace, or no, you cannot enter the workplace. So think about how you will take that on for your event and how you will implement that as well. So it even, like I mentioned, it talks about, if somebody does not pass a screening, well, then they're unfortunately not permitted at the workplace or the event, must self-isolate. So it really, really lays it out for you, which is great. Question number 3 in the workplace safety plan. How will you control the risk of transmission in your workplace, or in this case, at your event? So we all know a lot of information about COVID and how it spreads. So this gives you some really great tools to think about and consider about how you're going to control that transmission. One that we're all familiar with, maximize physical distancing and separation. Most effective way, absolutely. And it talks about how you can do that. Barriers, plexiglass, maintain separation. For example, if you want to look at it from an event venue lens, think about flow of traffic. Have one entry point and one exit point so you don't have people crossing paths and things like that. Source control masking. So using masks, as we all know, as source control. Even in step 3, for outdoor events in concert venues, it does still say masks are required. So although we know being outdoors is a lot more safe, you do still have to wear masks when you're attending certain types of events, which is all part of understanding what is happening when and where, what capacities and what venue. Ventilation and airflow. Again, outdoor is a lot easier than indoor, but if you're looking at indoor, make sure you have that conversation with your venue representative about fans and things like that.
Tanya, I have a quick question.
Yeah, Sherry.
Mike is asking, do producers still need plexiglass?
That's a great question. So what it says in the Ontario regulations is that for concerts or for performing arts, if audience can maintain 6 feet or more, whatever that 2 meters is, plexiglass is no longer required. However, if that's not the case, then plexiglass is required. And a small recommendation, if I may, I would also make sure you're engaging your performers and your artists on this subject, because we're trying to put on shows now as well. And we want to give them that option. Maybe some artists are not comfortable not having that plexiglass. So even though the guidelines say as long as social distancing can be maintained, you don't need it, I would still want to have that conversation with your artists and your staff to gauge that comfort level as well, right? Because you want to make sure that, again, you're keeping everybody safe as well. So yeah, that is what the regulations say though.
Thanks, that's great. One other question. How do mask rules impact the performers? Say for a large orchestra or band, what are the rules for them?
Yeah, that's a great question too. We all know that when performing, performers can't obviously wear masks because it's not ideal. For things like orchestras, I really have to look a little bit closer at the regulations in regards to masks. The overarching recommendations from laid out by the provincial government is wear masks when social distancing cannot be maintained. Again, with orchestras, we know that can be tricky. I was actually part of a concert band, so I couldn't imagine playing, like, you can't play a saxophone while wearing a mask, obviously, right? So I think you would just need to really look at the rules around wearing masks. Maybe it's as simple to as, if you can't social distance, maybe it's putting plexiglass barriers up between each orchestra member in order for them to feel safe. There is a lot of information about masks and about wearing masks on the provincial website as we go through it. But another tool that people don't realize that they can actually reach out to is use Peel Region Public Health. We use them a lot. If we have questions that maybe we're not sure about throughout, these guidelines or whatever it may be, give them a call, see if they can help you too, and be like, hey, listen, I have an orchestra, what are the recommendations? We used Peel Health very, very closely when we were planning our farmers market to say, okay, can you confirm? Because there's a lot of interpretation sometimes. So I hope that answers your question. I know it wasn't directly, but it gives you some options for sure.
And there's no further questions for now.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay, what are we talking about? Control measures, right? So a few other control measures for controlling transmission, which we all know about: supporting good hand hygiene, hand washing stations, hand sanitizer. If I never hear the word hand sanitizer again, I think I'll be really happy, but we all know it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, so those are some control measures to think about, as well as personal protective equipment. So masks, face shields, protective glasses, plexiglass, whatever your preference. But these are all really great examples of control measures. Okay, so for those of you who are just joining us, a recap, we're going through the COVID-19 workplace safety plan that has been put out by the province. So although it's called workplace, we're calling it our event safety plan. So question 4 is, what will you do if there's potential case of or suspected exposure to COVID-19 at your workplace or event? This one is important and it's a bit tricky. So there are several steps within this question, but I'm going to summarize it for you really quickly. Contact your local public health unit, which, as we know, City of Mississauga is Peel. Contact them for guidance on what to do if someone develops symptoms at your workplace or event, or you're told that one of your workers or colleagues has COVID-19. They will provide instructions and do contact tracing if needed, and you should make sure you're following their every move. So although it does talk about the steps here, see, contact public health is step number 2. If you want to do that right away, they will actually walk you through everything. So this question is really easy. So it's a lot of information here. Okay. And again, don't stress about that level of information. Peel Public Health will walk you through step by step. They're amazing. So question number 5 is, how will you manage any new risks caused by changes to the way you operate your business or your event? So changes to work or event practices to prevent COVID-19 may affect the way, it does affect the way that we manage risks at our event. So for example, you may have controlled the risk of injury from lifting heavy items by having 2 people lift that heavy item together, right? However, what that creates is another risk because you're having 2 people within 6 feet of another lifting an item together. So how do you control that risk that has now been created due to COVID-19? Well, they wear masks, simple. So this question talks about all those different changes. So, you're thinking about how COVID-19 has affected your event. Well, social distancing, different seating plan, different flow of traffic, do all of those items create additional risks for you as the event organizer or for your venue? So those are the types of things you're thinking about. And then how are you going to mitigate those risks? So you really just have to think big picture. And then last question for the workplace or event safety plan is, how are you going to make sure your plan is working? Now, on one-off shows, this could be a bit difficult because you don't have a repeat event to say, okay, well, we're going to do this exact event again, what worked, what didn't. But on shows that are reoccurring, it's very, very helpful. So operating a business or event during pandemic and recovery stages will involve so many different ways of working now. Things have gotten a lot harder for everybody. So checking to see how your plan is working will help you find the best solutions for your unique event and adapt to any changes. You may want to assign a specific team to take charge of any COVID-related issues. So I know that, this group here, we're all individual event organizers or volunteer boards or, whomever. I don't think you need to hire somebody specifically to handle COVID-19, but I do think it is a really great suggestion or recommendation to dedicate COVID-19 issues to one specific individual. And you know what, whether it is a board member, a volunteer, whomever it may be, this person is monitoring COVID-19 issues, and that way they can focus on that and ensuring they're following all of these recommendations. And that way everybody else can go about their business, and as long as that one person is staying on top of things, or maybe it's a team, right? I mean, whatever your preference. It is a little bit of responsibility, but as long as somebody is really focused on it, I think that's what will allow it to be successful. So we all know that post-event debriefs are very successful. You have the opportunity to talk about what went wrong, what can we do better for next time, what went right, what was incredibly successful, and what made our lives easier. All of those are really great tactics in how are you making sure your plan is working. So make sure that you guys are doing that and taking note of things that aren't working and things that do work. Okay, so that is essentially the workplace or event safety plan in a nutshell. Now, the guidelines here talks about a little bit more information. So as you guys all know, the City of Mississauga may request additional details related to everything that we just talked about, as well as a copy of your written safety plan. If I may interject a recommendation as well, as you are planning to apply to host an event, I would already have this safety plan locked and loaded, written and ready to go. I understand it can be a bit challenging because you might not know your venue. That's okay. You can fill in those gaps later. But if you know that you have an event coming up and you want it to be successful, getting a head start on writing this safety plan, because it will be required within applications when you're applying for your events, I think that is an incredibly ahead of the game trick for sure. Now, before we move on to other topics, I know that was a lot of information about the COVID-19 workplace safety plan. So I just wanted to throw it to Sherry to see if there was any questions that you wanted to address with that section.
I just got one right now. Question: if an organization submitted a safety plan last fall when we were allowed to open, do we have to resubmit it again?
That's a great question. I would say, unfortunately, yes, because the guidelines and the rules and capacities have all changed so much since the last time you submitted. But the good news is that you could probably reuse a lot of that information and just build it into your new plan so that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch. You just need to make sure you're addressing the newer template that the province has put out. Yeah.
Great. I don't see any further questions right now, but if anybody does have any, please add them to the chat and I'll ask them. For Tanya. Oh, there's a lot. One second.
That's one big one from me.
Okay.
Feel free to summarize. I just figured I'd give you detail to play with.
Okay, let me read it through, Tanya, and
Okay.
then I will get back to you.
Okay, no problem. Well, while Sherry does that, I'll continue the rest of the document. It's not too overbearing, hopefully. So we touch on specific topics when it comes to events and what is allowed, like your standard stuff. So sector specific events like drive-in and drive-through events. You know, for example, they're only allowed at Paramount Fine Food Center in the South parking lot right now. Vehicles must still be spaced 2 meters and must comply with conditions set out by Ontario regulations. Then there's a whole section on farmers market and, you know, the guidance around that. Most of the guidance is available through the Region of Peel website in the business section under sector specific guidance. We all know that indoor and outdoor farmers markets are operating, which is great. They've actually been able to operate this full time because they were considered an essential service, which is amazing. And capacities need to be determined on event space, and safety plans are required as per usual. I also think that safety plans will be a way of the future. Unfortunately, I don't think COVID is going away anytime soon. So even though we might get a little bit lighter on restrictions, I still think safety plans are going to be a thing for sure. Sherry, are you ready now?
Yes. So Matt Zaddy's thing was that his concern is that with many performers, it creates too high of a risk with saliva from too many people in an enclosed space. So he lists out a series of safety measures that his thoughts, which is like performer screening, audience screening, things we've already mentioned, as well as there's a lot of conversation about microphones to be wiped between performers and mic. And as well as Christine here from Southside Shuffle says, we are performed recently at festivals that ask if possible that they bring their own microphones. Do you have any thoughts on like microphones? You asked about that?
I think that is all really great advice and best practices. I think asking performers or whomever to bring their own microphone is a very smart idea. I really think also having the ability to be able to sanitize properly is really important as well. There is a lot of options, and it's having that open and transparent conversation with your artists as well, which I think is really important, and what their comfort level is. But I think all of those are amazing suggestions and really great things that are control measures, which would fit into your safety plan. But I really like the idea of having them bring their own microphone. That's amazing. We know that that might not all be the case with availability in some cases, but that's a really great solution. That way they don't have to worry about transmission or anybody else touching it. But if that's not the case, then have the ability to be able to clean and sanitize appropriately, for sure.
Great. And then I have one other question from Mike. Will you be talking about effective use of people such volunteers in different stages of the COVID plan?
Yeah, absolutely. This is almost through with the sector specific stuff, and then I've got some additional stuff to add at the end, if that's okay.
Great.
Perfect. Okay, so just a little bit more on sector specific items. So we talked about drive-ins and drive-throughs, farmers market, food and beverage, and food trucks and other mobile businesses. We've got 5 really great food trucks at Celebration Square right now. And in order to get them up and running, we went kind of above and beyond and took some additional measures to ensure that they were good to go. So things like having takeout available, drive-through if you have the space, delivery. We all know outdoor dining is permitted now, so we were able to put tables out, which is great. But you know, socially distanced lineups, socially distanced seating, screening questions. We pasted like the screening questions on the trucks themselves. You know, making sure the trucks have adequate spacing, providing social distance markers for crowd control. And last summer, we really encouraged the use of mobile ordering as well, which actually helped spike their business quite significantly. So that is food trucks and all that fun stuff. And then, we talk about modified event planning and programming. So we all know that it's tricky right now, especially with concerts and different types of events. So you really want to think about how you can limit that control measure, like exactly like that question had just suggested. So although we don't want to limit too much or have to cancel, but we really have to make sure that we're making that decision on what is safe and what is not. So limiting or canceling activities where physical distancing or other appropriate controls cannot be implemented. Allowing for sufficient time in between events and activities to allow safe and distance entry and exit. So we talked about flow of traffic, entry and exit points. Keeping the duration of the event and gathering to a minimum to limit contact among patrons. A big thing with step 3 for concerts is everything must be by registration only or ticket sales. So that's something key to remember, which was tricky for us at the city. We're running free programs, but we had to do them. We're having to do them by registration now, even though they're free. So we're using Eventbrite and things like that just to help manage that situation. And using contactless transaction methods as well, as we all know, is very successful. So last but not least, for the planning guide itself, there are a ton of incredible resources here. Some that will absolutely address all the questions asked here, as well as give you some additional recommendation and suggestions. So I strongly recommend for those of you who are in the planning and or driver's seat, if you will, to take a look at some of these resources. They're extremely helpful. So that is the planning guide, but I wanted to kind of touch on just some key points or advice, notes, things that I've experienced while we're planning through this crazy time and executing events also through this crazy time. So be prepared, number 1. Do your research, read through what is allowed, what is not allowed, and how you interpret those rules and regulations, and what your resources are. When you plan on applying for an event, have that safety plan ready to go. Yes, sure, you might need to fill in some blanks like I mentioned, but have it ready. It's one of the first things you should start on, and it will actually help you think about how you're going to take those measures to keep your colleagues and your patrons and volunteers safe. Dedicate someone, volunteers, teams, whomever, to handle COVID-19 related items. So somebody is filling out the safety plan, is following up with Peel Health, is asking those important questions. I think that we all know how events work, and we all have our own teams of people within our events. So what's your team structure look like? Who is handling what? Who is responsible for what? At the city, I can tell you we have a roles and responsibilities matrix that talks about, okay, Tanya, you're responsible for this. Pearl, you're responsible for this, and so on and so forth. So who's doing what? And how are you making sure that everything is captured? So that is another big piece of advice for me. But also dedicating somebody, and again, you don't have to hire somebody that is a COVID-19 expert. If you want to do that, that's okay too. And that's absolutely your prerogative. And is it a great suggestion? Sure. But we all know that budget might not support such a thing. But having somebody go through, read everything, and become their own expert in regards to COVID-19, I think is really beneficial for different team structures. And that way, everybody can continue doing what they need to do, and hopefully your event will be successful and safe. Yeah, Sherry, go ahead.
Are time between events and flow insights provided in the province or city documents?
No, not necessarily. But what will happen is when you get to the point of working with your venue, when you get to that level, like it's not necessarily planned in advance, but they will be able to provide that recommendation for you. So I can give you an example. At Celebration Square, when you have to fill out your event application, it talks about your schedule. So once we receive what your tentative schedule is, the venue will sit down with you and say, okay, this works, but I think, maybe this might be a better suggestion. Or you have an hour in between shows, might I suggest 90 minutes for additional cleaning measures? So I think there is that level of discussion, but I think that happens at the operations planning level when you're having those conversations with your venue. But it's definitely something you should be thinking of in advance to say, okay, I've got this many shows. How much time do I need for people to get in and get out? And am I cleaning? If so, what am I cleaning? How long is it going to take to dry? Things like that. Yeah.
Great. Don't have any further questions for now, but if anybody has them, please do add them to the chat.
Absolutely. I also wanted to point out that I think that this safety plan or operating within COVID-19 is an amazing opportunity to work with each other. So again, we're all event organizers. We are all feeling the same levels of stress and the same question marks almost as well. So if you know that you're planning for your event and you've already developed your safety plan, and maybe some of you have already done events that have been incredibly successful and safe, it's an opportunity to connect with each other, chat through it. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? At the end of the day, I say event world is kind of small. It's large, but it is small. We all know each other. So I think it just provides such an amazing opportunity to work together, to collaborate on things like safety plans and control methods and ideas and things like that. So, but again, that's just my own personal opinion as well. And I know that as we now are producing events or small events in our amphitheater, like I'm available as a resource too. And I'm sure I'll say after the meeting, but Sherry and Mike, feel free to, pass along my contact information. And if you have a question, call me up, let's chat about it. I can give you my insight as well and kind of go from there. I think, there was one thing also that I think is really important when we talked about budgeting and funding and things like that. So something that I teach at Centennial is sponsorship. And I know that a lot of festivals and events rely on things like sponsorship and grants. And, the more prepared you are and the more polished you are, the more information you have to be able to have that safety plan to say, yes, we are looking to do an event, but here's our very well planned out, thought through safety plan. As long as you're prepared, I think that will go over well with people like, your venue liaison at the City of Mississauga. They're going to take one look at that plan and be like, oh, amazing, they're ready to go. You can also use that when it comes to things like gaining artists, gaining sponsorship. Everybody is very cautious right now. Although everybody's also very excited for the return of live events, a lot of people are very cautious, and as they should be, right? We all want to make sure we're safe, but having that information ready to go to address those concerns in advance, I think would go a very, very long way. So keep that in mind as well.
I have a question. It's about requiring proof of double vaccination for audience performers.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. There's nothing at the city that requires that or says that is required. You as the private event organizer, I think that you would have to do a little bit more research on that, but I'm also not a lawyer. So I unfortunately can't speak to that. All I can tell you is that is not a requirement from the city side.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So Sherry, that's actually it for me. I didn't really think I was going to talk this long, so I'm surprised. But I just really wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to present this to you. I'm going to stop sharing now because I realize that I'm still sharing my screen. I really hope that this information was helpful. And thank you, I guess, all for your time. I really appreciate it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's an encouraging look at new homework for everyone. And a lot of people are already engaged in it and have looked at the options that they face. And I think, Tanya, you've done a terrific job of pointing to the kind of help that's available. And there's no restriction on when people call you. For example, if they've got a question about the plan prior to doing the plan, they should get in touch with you sooner than later. You're here to help, as are your team members. And, rather than do a plan and find out you missed out on something, there's an opportunity to be collaborative, I assume, when they're developing it, and sort of do a little bit of a lookout checklist as to what to watch for and what other people might be missing. Take advantage of other people's efforts in informing the sort of collaborative angle you mentioned earlier. Do plans get shared? Is there a benefit in that? For example, you've got a plan for Port Credit Memorial Park that's been, developed, that was successful. A concert's a concert, some might say. So is there a way that you might share that with the next festival going into that venue?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of exactly what I was talking about. At the end of the day, we all want to keep each other safe. So if there's been some success with these safety plans, I would strongly recommend sharing them if you all feel comfortable. There's some things around the city's perspective, like if we get a safety plan, we're not allowed to share personal information due to freedom of information, all that fun stuff, but we can ask the person who created its permission. And if they say, yeah, absolutely, I'll share it, no problem, then fantastic. But yeah, absolutely, Mike, for sure.
Great, good. Any final questions for Tanya before she goes off to her next job?
Mike, I would just like to say, as some of you know, we, and I see Mary's here and Chris Kane is here, we are going to be live at the Southside Shuffle this year. We've all worked very hard to make sure that we're going to implement all of these safety measures, and we're very excited, as are our fans, that we are going live. But we will certainly, after that experience, we'll have a lot of experience, hopefully, that we'll be able to share with others who are looking forward to their own events next year. I suspect that the Celebration Square events are pretty well wiped out for this year, but I guess you are hopefully planning a full slate for next year.
Yes, Ron. Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a good opportunity for me to do a quick plug, if that's okay. So our large event application period actually opens September 1st for Celebration Square for 2022. So I keep an eye on our social media at MCS Events and on our website, but it is planned to launch September 1st, and it's open for the whole month of September. So if anybody's interested in hosting a large event at the Square next year, apply.
Now, what about, and I'm just throwing ideas out here, but what about something this winter at Celebration Square? Do you think that's going to be a possibility? If somebody came along with a plan to do a phenomenal winter festival, in I don't know, February or January or whatever, would the city be prepared to listen to that?
Absolutely. I think we're always open to ideas. We've got our own programming plan as well. As you know, we typically do a holiday kickoff event, which is Light Up the Square, which is usually late November. And then, of course, our New Year's Eve event. Right now, they've both got big question marks next to them until we figure out what's happening in the capacity realm. But I think we're always open to ideas, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you all. We're looking forward to bringing our friends in the arts together on additional subjects in the near future. Our new and soon to be announced Marty's Hub, artist portal, and a meeting place for Mississauga artists and the public to connect. We'll be reaching out to you on that subject. And then there's our Arts for Mental Health conference that is in the offing as well. So there's going to be some opportunities for us to make ourselves known to each other in the near future. And Tanya, thank you for enlightening us on the options available in this new COVID era of event planning.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And it was so nice to meet all of you, even though it was via Zoom, for those of you I don't know. So thank you so much.